Fired and rejected, black single mother of 4 found an old cabin, and a strange thing happened. Lucia knelt on the dusty cabin floor, the firelight flickering across her tired face. Her worn denim jacket clung to her shoulders as the night wind crept through the cracks in the walls. Nearby, her 4 children slept close together under thin blankets, their breath steady and soft. In her trembling hands, Lucia held a weathered leather journal and an old photograph of a black woman standing proudly in front of this same cabin many years ago. The woman's smile seemed almost alive in the glow of the flames. Lucia flipped through the journal, her heart racing as she reached the final entry. It described a mother in the same struggle she faced now. But something felt off. The ink on the last page looked fresh, like it had been written only hours ago. Before she could process it, soft footsteps echoed on the porch outside. Lucia froze. A gentle knock followed. A calm, familiar female voice spoke through the door. "I've been waiting for you to find that journal." Who was at the door, and how did they know Lucia would be here? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. Now come, let's take you through how it all began. Lucia froze where she knelt, the sound of the woman's voice cutting through the silence like a thread pulled tight. Her heart pounded as she stood, brushing dust from her jeans. She looked toward the door, unsure whether to open it or tell her children to hide. From outside, the voice spoke again, steady, calm, and patient. "It's all right. My name is Sarah Chen Williams. I run the community center in town." Lucia hesitated. The firelight flickered across the journal still open in her hands. "How do you know about this place?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because my grandmother helped build its purpose," came the reply. "May I come in?" Lucia took a slow breath and opened the door halfway. Standing there was a woman in her late 40s, holding a lantern and a paper bag. Her kind brown eyes met Lucia's with quiet understanding. She stepped inside, removing her gloves. The smell of cold air and pine followed her. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," the visitor said softly. "But I saw the car parked down the road and guessed someone had found the cabin again." She set the bag on the table. "Bread, soup, and tea. You look like you could use all 3. Lucia didn't know what to say. She offered a weak smile. "You said your grandmother helped build this place's purpose." The woman nodded. Her name was Mrs. Chen. She was close friends with a woman named Josephine Miller. "My mother was Pastor Williams's daughter. They both believed this cabin should always be a safe place for families who've lost everything." Lucia's breath caught. "You mean Josephine from the journal?" "Yes," Sarah said, glancing toward the book near the fire. "That journal has been passed down through every family that stayed here for more than 50 years. The handwriting you saw on the last page, those entries were written only 6 months ago by a mother from Georgia. She and her kids lived here after losing their home to a flood." Lucia stared at the pages again. The ink still looked fresh. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "This place is part of a small trust my family maintains," Sarah continued. "We don't talk about it publicly. Some families need a place where no one will judge them for how they got here. It's a secret network, passed quietly through generations. You're safe here as long as you need to be." Tears filled Lucia's eyes before she could stop them. "I didn't know something like this still existed." "Kindness doesn't make headlines," Sarah replied. "But it survives. My family just tries to keep the lights on for those who need it most." She pulled a folded paper from her coat pocket and slid it toward Lucia. "Here's my phone number. I can get you cleaning work at the community center tomorrow morning. It's not much, but it'll help. I can also connect you with a local food bank and some churches that help with supplies." Lucia hesitated to take it. You'd really do that for us? You don't even know me. I know enough, Sarah said with a small smile. I know Josephine helped people who reminded her of herself. And you're standing in her old home, holding her story in your hands. That's enough for me. The sound of crackling fire filled the silence between them. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a sigh. But you should know, Sarah added quietly, this town has changed. Some of us still believe in Josephine's way, helping others without judgment. But there are those who don't like strangers, especially anyone using the cabin. If anyone asks, say you're here under my authority. That will calm most people. Lucia nodded slowly. I appreciate the warning. Sarah's expression softened. One more thing. Josephine left something here for future families. Something that goes beyond shelter and food. I can't tell you what it is, because she made each family discover it for themselves. You'll know when it's time. Lucia felt a spark of curiosity beneath her exhaustion. Do you know what it might be? Sarah's eyes glinted in the firelight. Only that everyone who's found it left stronger than they came. The two women sat for a while, speaking in low voices so as not to wake the children. Sarah told Lucia about her grandmother's generosity and her father's sermons about dignity through struggle. She spoke of how Josephine's journal began as a record of survival, but became a symbol of renewal for every family that wrote in it. Eventually, Sarah stood to leave. She wrapped her scarf around her neck and took up her lantern. The road into town is rough, but I'll come by in a few days to check on you. Try to get some rest tonight. Lucia walked her to the door. Thank you, for everything. Sarah smiled. You don't owe me thanks. Just don't give up. That's what this cabin was built for. When the lantern light disappeared into the trees, Lucia closed the door and leaned against it. The air inside was warmer now, though she wasn't sure if it was from the fire or the kindness she'd just witnessed. She turned back to the journal and began reading more entries. Each one told a different story: families displaced by layoffs, floods, or eviction. Every voice carried the same ache and eventual strength. A father wrote about losing his home after a factory shut down. A young mother described fleeing an abusive marriage. One page ended with words that made Lucia's throat tighten. Sometimes, the world forgets you exist. But here, someone remembered. Lucia looked over at her sleeping children. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. She turned to the most recent entry, written in neat handwriting. It read, "If you're reading this, don't be afraid. The cabin gives back what you put in. Trust the process, and it will lead you where you need to go." Lucia traced the letters with her fingers, wondering who had written them and whether their story had ended in hope. Outside, a branch cracked in the wind. She glanced toward the door again, but this time there was no fear, only a quiet resolve. She blew out the lantern, pulled her blanket over her shoulders, and whispered a promise to herself. I'm going to make this place a beginning, not an ending. The fire burned low, but its glow lingered long after she fell asleep. The next morning, a pale light broke through the mist, revealing the outline of the mountains in the distance. Lucia packed a small tote bag with the $50 Sarah had given her and wrapped Olga and Lucas in extra layers before setting out. She left Kara and Nelson behind with clear instructions not to open the door for anyone. Keep the fire low and stay inside, she said firmly. Kara nodded without meeting her eyes. The walk to town was long, 3 miles of cracked asphalt winding between tall trees and half-collapsed fences. Olga tried to keep up, her small boots crunching against the frosty ground, while Lucas held Lucia's hand, occasionally stumbling. The cold bit at their fingers, but the thought of buying food and supplies kept Lucia moving. Laurel Springs revealed itself slowly, like a memory trying to come back. The first thing she saw was the old mill, its windows boarded up, the paint faded to gray. Next to it stood a row of modern coffee shops with bright signs, their parking lots filled with clean cars and expensive bikes. The contrast stung. Lucia guided her children across the narrow street and into the grocery store. The bell above the door jingled, but no one greeted them. She grabbed a basket and walked through the aisles, careful to stick to essentials: bread, beans, rice, canned fruit, soap. Olga reached for a small chocolate bar, but Lucia shook her head gently. "Next time, sweetheart. We need the basics first." A few shoppers stopped to glance at them. Their stares weren't curious, they were measuring. Whispers started near the frozen food section. "Isn't that the woman staying in the old Miller cabin? Thought that place was condemned. People just move in now without asking." Lucia kept her head down, focusing on the items in her basket, pretending she didn't hear. But the words sank deep. At the checkout counter, she placed everything carefully on the conveyor belt. The cashier, a young man in his 20s with a name tag that read Todd, didn't look at her. He scanned each item slowly, jaw tight. "That'll be $56.80, he said flatly. Lucia pulled out the bill Sarah had given her. "Can you take a few things off? I've only got 50. Todd sighed, exaggerated and loud, as if she were asking too much. "Guess I can take the fruit off." Before he could, a soft voice behind Lucia spoke. "No need for that, son. I'll cover the rest." Lucia turned to see an elderly black woman in a long gray coat and matching hat. Her posture was straight, her eyes warm but alert. She smiled at Lucia, then handed the cashier a $10 bill. "It's all right," she said gently. "Let the lady take what she needs." Lucia blinked, caught between gratitude and surprise. "Thank you, but you don't have to." "I know I don't," the woman replied, her smile deepening. "But I knew Josephine Miller once. Anyone staying at her cabin deserves a hand, not judgment." The cashier's expression faltered for a moment before he handed Lucia her change without a word. Outside, the cold air hit them again. Lucia balanced the grocery bags while Olga and Lucas walked close beside her. The older woman followed them out. "I'm Dorothy Hayes," she said softly. "Used to teach at the elementary school here before I retired. Josephine was a dear friend." Lucia nodded, still overwhelmed. "I've been reading her journal. I can't believe how much she went through." Dorothy looked toward the hills. "That cabin has sheltered more souls than I can count. But not everyone in town honors its purpose anymore. Some folks don't like what it stands for, help without judgment. They think struggle means failure. Be careful who you trust." "I will," Lucia said quietly. Dorothy reached into her coat pocket and handed Lucia a small notepad with a phone number scribbled on it. "If you ever need help, or just someone to talk to, call me. I may be old, but I still know who to talk to when things get rough." "Thank you," Lucia said, meaning every word. After Dorothy walked away, Lucia continued down Main Street with the children. They passed the courthouse, the post office, and a new real estate office advertising Mountain View properties. Near the town square, a sign taped to a diner window caught Lucia's eye. "Help wanted, server needed." Her pulse quickened. Maybe this was her chance. She told Olga and Lucas to wait on the bench outside, then entered the diner. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. A few customers sat at booths, their conversations low and steady. Behind the counter stood a stocky man with a white apron and thinning hair. "Morning," Lucia said politely. "I saw your sign. I wanted to ask about the position." He looked up briefly. "You got experience?" "Yes," she replied quickly. "I worked in customer service for years, managed a sales team, and I'm willing to start anywhere." He handed her a short form and a pen. She filled it out at the counter, writing her address as Rural Route 7, Miller Cabin. When she returned it, he scanned the paper, his eyes stopping at the address. His expression hardened. "You're staying out at the Miller place?" Lucia nodded cautiously. "Yes, just temporarily. I'm—" Before she could finish, he tore the paper in half and dropped it in the trash. "We don't hire folks with no stable housing. Nothing personal, but it causes problems." Lucia stared at the shredded form. "I'm just trying to work. I've got 4 kids to feed." He wiped his hands on his apron. "That's not my issue. Best thing you can do is move along before people start talking." For a moment, Lucia stood frozen, her face burning. The room felt smaller, every whisper pressing down on her. She turned toward the door, swallowing the lump in her throat. Outside, Olga and Lucas jumped up when they saw her. "Did you get the job, Mom?" Lucas asked. She forced a smile. "Not this one, sweetheart. But we'll keep trying." The walk back to the cabin was quieter than the walk to town. The groceries weighed heavy in her arms, but the heavier weight was inside her chest. By the time they reached the dirt road, the sun was dipping behind the hills. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney. Kara must have kept the fire going. When Lucia stepped inside, Nelson rushed over. "You're back. We were getting worried." Lucia set the bags down and managed a tired smile. "We're okay. We got food." Kara stood near the window, arms crossed. "Did anyone bother you?" Lucia shook her head, though the memory of the diner still stung. "No one we can't handle." The children helped unpack the groceries, their chatter soft and hopeful. When they finally sat down to eat, Lucia looked at each of their faces, reminded why she had to keep pushing. The town might see them as outsiders, but she refused to let that define them. This cabin, once a stranger's refuge, was now their home, and she intended to protect it, no matter what came next. The cabin slowly became their world, a fragile shelter where hope and hardship shared the same roof. Each child found their own way of coping, though not all of them easily. Kara, 14, was the first to rebel. She spent her days sitting on the old porch steps, staring at the dirt road like it had stolen her future. Her phone had long lost service, and every attempt to reach her friends back home ended in frustration. "You said this was temporary," she snapped one night, tears welling in her eyes. "You said we'd be okay." Lucia tried to comfort her, but Kara pulled away, accusing her mother of always making excuses. That night, when the others slept, Lucia sat beside her eldest daughter in the quiet. She finally told her the truth, about the countless job interviews where she was turned away, the looks of pity or suspicion, the one supervisor who said hiring her would make customers uncomfortable. Kara listened silently, the anger softening into something closer to understanding. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I just thought you gave up." Lucia shook her head. "I couldn't give up. I had you all to fight for." Nelson, 10, became the family's little guardian. Every morning, he explored the nearby woods, returning with kindling or berries. One afternoon, he met an older man named Tom at the edge of a nearby creek. Tom, a retired ranger, taught him to fish and told him stories about the cabin's long history. Nelson listened wide-eyed and came home proudly carrying 2 small trout, wrapped in leaves. "We don't have to be helpless, Mom," he said, smiling for the first time in weeks. Lucia hugged him tightly, whispering that he was braver than most grown men. Lucas, 8, struggled the most. The move and uncertainty weighed on him until he stopped talking for days. At night, he woke from nightmares, trembling. Olga, only 5, became his anchor, singing softly or holding his hand until he fell back asleep. Sometimes, Lucia found them curled together like 2 kittens, both finding comfort in each other's warmth. Olga, in her innocent optimism, made friends with 2 kids from a nearby farm. She'd come home muddy and laughing, telling Lucia stories about their animals and games. Her joy filled the cabin with a light none of them realized they'd missed. Even Kara began to smile again when Olga brought her wildflowers and said, "Look, big sis, the woods gave us something pretty." Days turned into weeks. Lucia picked up cleaning work at the community center and 2 churches. The pay was barely enough for groceries, but the routine gave her a sense of dignity she hadn't felt in months. Each night, after putting the children to bed, she sat by the dim firelight and read from Josephine's old journal. The stories inside were raw and human, families who had struggled like hers but endured. One entry in particular caught her heart. It was written in 1987 by a single father who'd stayed in the same cabin. "When hope seemed gone, I found something buried below this place. A map, not of gold or treasure, but of purpose. A map to hope itself." Lucia stared at those words for a long time. She touched the page gently, wondering what the man had meant. A map to hope. Could Josephine have hidden something beneath the cabin all those years ago? The thought stayed with her for days. During meals, while sweeping floors at the church, while listening to Olga hum to herself, it lingered like a soft whisper. She began to believe the journal wasn't just a record of survival. It was a message passed down through generations, waiting for her to finish what others had started. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Lucia looked out the small window at the moonlit yard. The cabin creaked as if breathing. "We'll find it," she murmured. "Whatever Josephine left behind, we'll find it." It was no longer just about surviving the week or scraping enough for bread. It was about giving her children something more, something that said they belonged to a legacy of courage, not defeat. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Lucia felt something shift deep inside her. The fear that had gripped her heart was giving way to a quiet, determined hope. The journal had spoken to her, and she was ready to listen. Saturday morning came with a faint chill, the kind that hinted winter wasn't far off. Lucia gathered her children around the kitchen table, the journal open before them. The fire popped quietly as she traced her finger along a page filled with careful handwriting. "Josephine wrote that something was hidden in the woods," she said. "Something meant for those who came after." Nelson's eyes lit up first. "You mean like a treasure?" "Maybe not gold," Lucia replied, "but something that mattered." They packed flashlights, gloves, and a small shovel before setting off into the dense woods behind the cabin. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the air smelled of pine and wet soil. Lucia carried the journal, stopping occasionally to read aloud from different entries that hinted at a meeting place, beyond the second ridge, near the fallen oak, beneath where storms never touched the ground. After nearly an hour of searching, Nelson called out, "Mom! Over here!" He stood by a mound of tangled vines and ivy. Beneath them, half buried in the dirt, was a rusted metal hatch. Lucia knelt beside it, heart pounding. With Kara's help, she pried it open, the hinges groaning after years of neglect. A faint smell of damp earth rose as they peered inside. A short ladder led into darkness. Lucia went first, her flashlight cutting through the dust. The small chamber below was dry, remarkably so. In the corner sat a metal trunk, covered in grime but still intact. Its latch gave way easily. Inside lay an organized collection of binders, folders, and sealed envelopes. Each item was wrapped in plastic, carefully labeled. Lucia lifted one and read the title, Employment Discrimination, 1964 to 1975. Another, Legal Aid Network, Allies Across the South. The children crowded around as she flipped through handwritten notes, letters, and typed documents. They were detailed accounts, stories of people who had faced injustice, fought back, and survived. At the bottom of the trunk, Lucia found a thick envelope addressed in fading ink, "To the next family who finds this place." She opened it slowly, unfolding the yellowed paper inside. "My name is Josephine Miller. I built this archive because I learned that surviving isn't enough. We must fight back, document everything, and use the system against itself. Inside, you'll find contacts, laws, and letters from those who refused to stay silent. This cabin isn't just a shelter, it's a witness." Lucia's hands trembled as she read aloud. The children were silent. The air inside the shelter seemed to grow heavier with meaning. Kara, who had once wished to leave the cabin behind, whispered, "She was like you, Mom. She didn't quit." Among the papers, they found a small, well-preserved directory of names, people who had supported others through discrimination cases over the decades. The final pages listed more recent entries, including one name written in newer ink, Rebecca Morrison, attorney at law, continuing the work of James Morrison. Lucia recognized that name from Josephine's earlier entries. He had helped her win her case back in 1969. Lucia stared at it for a long moment. She realized Josephine hadn't just hidden a record. She had built a bridge between generations of people who refused to give up. The children explored the shelter quietly, passing around the old binders. Nelson found a folder labeled 1998 filled with letters from families who had stayed there, each adding their story to the growing archive. "It's like everyone who came here left something to help the next," he said. "We should do that too someday." Lucia smiled, touched by his words. "We will," she promised. Kara, standing near the entrance, wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry for what I said before," she murmured. "I didn't understand." Lucia reached for her hand. "You do now," she said gently. "This place isn't a curse. It's a reminder that we're part of something bigger." They carried the trunk back to the cabin together, step by step. Once inside, Lucia laid out the contents on the table as if arranging sacred relics. The documents were fragile but alive with the voices of those who came before. She read aloud portions of letters from women who had fought for fair pay, men who had filed complaints despite threats, and families who had stood up for justice in small towns where silence had once been safer. When evening came, the children sat around the fire as Lucia typed the number from the most recent contact list into her old phone. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. Then she pressed it. A recorded voice answered, "You've reached the office of Rebecca Morrison, civil rights attorney. Please leave a message." Lucia took a breath. "Hello, my name is Lucia Smith," she began. "I found something I think you should know about, something your father started a long time ago. I also need help with a wrongful termination case. They said I didn't belong, but I think I do." Her voice trembled slightly, but she finished with quiet strength. "Please call me back." She ended the call and set the phone down beside the open journal. The children were watching her, their faces lit by the flicker of the fire. For the first time since losing her job, Lucia didn't feel powerless. She looked around the small cabin, the same space that had once felt like exile, and saw it differently. It wasn't just shelter. It was proof that people could turn pain into purpose. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees as if carrying Josephine's words into the night. "Survival isn't enough." Lucia nodded to herself, whispering, "No, it's not. It's time to live." Lucia's phone rang early the next morning. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway. "Lucia Smith?" A calm, confident voice asked. "This is Rebecca Morrison. You left me a message about Josephine's journal, and a possible discrimination case." Lucia sat up, the sound of the name sending a shiver through her. "Yes. I found your contact in Josephine's archive. I think I have a case, but I wasn't sure anyone would believe me." "I do," Rebecca replied. My father made me promise that anyone who came through that network would never be turned away. I'll take your case, pro bono if necessary. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Lucia exhaled in disbelief. Yes, absolutely. The next day, Lucia took a bus to the nearby city of Brookhaven, carrying a worn folder filled with her employment records, performance reviews, and emails. Rebecca's office sat on the second floor of a modest brick building. The attorney herself was a poised woman in her early 50s, her silver-streaked hair tied back neatly, her tone both professional and warm. After introductions, Rebecca motioned for Lucia to sit. "Tell me everything," she said, sliding a legal pad across the desk. Lucia described 14 years of loyalty to a pharmaceutical company she once believed in, late nights, cancelled vacations, and the effort to balance motherhood with excellence. She spoke of her sudden termination after missing a single sales target, her replacement by a younger, unmarried woman, and the dismissive way her supervisor told her the company needed fresh energy. Rebecca listened carefully, taking notes. "Do you have copies of your evaluations?" Lucia handed over the folder. "Every one of them. All positive, until this last year." Rebecca flipped through the pages, her brows knitting. 14 years of excellence, no disciplinary actions, and this sudden drop after you took family leave. This isn't just unfair, it's discriminatory. She leaned back, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "You're facing a combination of family status, race, and gender bias. It's a powerful intersection, and the law doesn't protect it well, but it should." Lucia nodded slowly. "They thought I'd give up. But I can't." Rebecca met her gaze. "Then we'll fight. It won't be easy, corporations have deep pockets and long patience, but we'll make them answer for it." Over the next hour, they built a framework for the case. Rebecca outlined what they'd need: sworn statements, employment records, witness testimonies. She also explained the risks: months, maybe years, of court appearances, motions, and delays. Lucia's voice was steady when she answered. "I'll do it. I have to. Not just for me, for every woman who's been told she's too complicated to hire." Rebecca smiled faintly. "Good. You've got more strength than most people I've met in a courtroom." When Lucia returned to Laurel Springs that evening, she felt lighter. For the first time since losing her job, she had a plan. A few days later, Rebecca called again. "I want you to meet someone," she said. "Her name's Priya Patel. She runs Laurel Valley Organic Farm. Her family was part of Josephine's network in the 70s. She's been helping women rebuild their lives ever since." Lucia met Mrs. Patel the next morning. The farm stretched across rolling fields of greenhouses and vegetable plots, the air filled with the scent of herbs and soil. Mrs. Patel, a strong woman in her 60s with kind eyes, greeted Lucia with a handshake. "Rebecca told me about you," she said. "We always have room for people who want to work and rebuild. I can't pay much at first, but if you prove yourself, there's room to grow. Interested?" Lucia nodded eagerly. "Yes. I'm ready for anything." Mrs. Patel led her through the sorting area where workers packed crates of produce for local stores. "We sell to regional groceries and restaurants. I need someone who can manage distribution, talk to clients, and handle sales." Lucia hesitated. "That's what I did before, pharmaceutical sales. Just, without the chemicals." Mrs. Patel laughed. "Perfect. You'll fit right in." By the end of her first week, Lucia had already made an impact. She reorganized the delivery schedule, introduced a tracking sheet for inventory, and secured 2 new buyers, a local restaurant chain and a co-op market in Brookhaven. Her experience with contracts and presentations translated seamlessly into farm sales. Mrs. Patel watched her interactions with quiet admiration. "You've got a gift, Lucia. I can see why they were threatened by you." Lucia smiled, her confidence returning. "Maybe that's what scared them. A woman like me isn't supposed to win." "Then make sure you do," Mrs. Patel replied firmly. In the evenings, Lucia returned to the cabin exhausted but fulfilled. Her children noticed the change. Kara saw her mother smile again. Nelson bragged that his mom was basically a boss at a farm. Lucas and Olga started helping with small tasks, cleaning up and cooking together. One night, Lucia sat by the fire with her phone in hand. Rebecca had texted, "Gathered strong evidence. Preparing to file initial complaint. Stay steady. We're making progress." Lucia reread the message, then opened Josephine's journal. The last entry she'd read spoke about standing firm even when the ground shakes. She closed her eyes, whispering, "I'm still standing." Each day after that, Lucia split her time between the farm and preparing for the case. Rebecca coached her through deposition practice and evidence review over phone calls that often stretched past midnight. When Lucia felt doubt creeping in, Mrs. Patel reminded her, "You're not fighting alone. The women before you cleared the path. You're just walking it farther." By the end of the month, Rebecca had filed the preliminary discrimination claim with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The process had officially begun. Lucia marked the date in Josephine's journal, underlining it twice. The next morning, as she headed to work, the sun broke through the clouds, warming the frost-covered grass. For the first time in months, Lucia didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was moving forward. When Lucia filed her lawsuit, she knew it would rattle cages, but she hadn't expected the small town of Laurel Springs to split open along its quiet fault lines. Within days, whispers turned to stares, stares turned to open hostility. Mr. Patterson, the diner owner who had torn up her job application, was suddenly the loudest voice in town meetings. He told anyone who'd listen that outsiders were trying to stir trouble and people needed to protect what was theirs. By the end of the week, Lucia could feel the tension every time she walked down Main Street. Conversations stopped when she passed by. Flyers for her cleaning services were torn down. At the grocery store, a woman she had chatted with just last week pretended not to see her. One gray Tuesday morning, a white pickup pulled into the dirt road by the cabin. 2 county inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand, talking quietly as they approached. Lucia met them on the porch, the children watching nervously from the window. "We've received reports that this structure is being occupied illegally," one of them said. Lucia's stomach dropped. She tried to explain about the trust, about Sarah's arrangement, but the men barely listened. They walked around the property, taking photos, muttering about code violations that didn't exist. That evening, she called Sarah's family trust office in tears. Within 48 hours, an attorney faxed over documentation confirming the cabin's legal standing. The inspectors backed off, but the damage was done. The message was clear: someone wanted them gone. 2 nights later, Lucia woke to Nelson's trembling voice calling from outside. "Mom, come quick." Spray paint covered the side of the cabin. "Go home." Lucia stood frozen for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. Kara, half asleep and angry, wanted to call the sheriff, but Lucia shook her head. "We'll handle it our way." She handed Nelson a sponge, filled a bucket with soapy water, and the two of them scrubbed in silence under the pale moonlight. Each stroke erased a little of the hate, leaving behind the stubborn strength of a family that refused to be moved. Word spread through the network before morning. Mrs. Dorothy Hayes was the first to arrive, carrying a basket of cornbread and determination. By afternoon, 3 cars had pulled up: retired teachers, old church ladies, and a young couple who had once lived in the cabin themselves. They told Lucia, "You're not alone." Mrs. Dorothy decided it was time for the town to remember the cabin's true history. She called a meeting at the community center, inviting anyone who had ever been touched by Josephine's work. Lucia hesitated, afraid of drawing more attention, but Dorothy's steady hand on her shoulder convinced her. "They've had the microphone long enough," the older woman said. "Now it's our turn." That Thursday evening, folding chairs filled the center's old meeting hall. The air buzzed with conversation, families of every background, young and old, sharing quiet greetings and memories. Lucia sat in the back with her children, listening as Dorothy opened with a short prayer. "Many of you know the cabin at rural Route 7, she began. "Some call it the Miller Place. But for 50 years, it's been more than a shelter. It's been a lifeline. It started with Josephine Miller in 1969, and it's helped generations find their footing when the world knocked them down." One by one, people stood to share. A woman from across town said the cabin sheltered her family after a fire. A man described how Josephine helped him get a job when no one else would hire him because of his record. An older gentleman tearfully recalled how the cabin gave his mother a place to stay when his father left. Lucia felt her throat tighten. For the first time since arriving in Laurel Springs, she didn't feel invisible. Kara leaned against her arm quietly. Nelson was taking notes in a worn notebook, his face serious. Near the end of the meeting, a woman with a press badge raised her hand. "Maria Torres, Appalachian Daily Review," she said. "I've been following this story. I think people need to know the history of this cabin and the families it's helped. Would anyone be willing to talk to me?" Dorothy looked toward Lucia. "She would," she said simply. That night, under the soft light of a single lamp, Lucia told Maria everything, about the eviction, the rejection, the graffiti, and the discovery of Josephine's archive. Maria listened closely, her recorder clicking quietly on the table. "This isn't just a local story," she said when Lucia finished. "It's about legacy and justice. People will care." 2 weeks later, the feature ran, "The Cabin of Courage, a hidden network that protected families for half a century." Photos of the old shelter, Josephine's letters, and Lucia's family filled the pages. Within days, the story was shared across social media. Messages poured in from former residents, advocacy groups, and reporters asking to visit. For every kind message, though, there were cruel ones. Anonymous emails accused Lucia of exploiting history for attention. The diner crowd muttered about outsiders trying to rewrite the town's past. Still, support grew stronger than the hate. Donations arrived from neighboring towns. The trust arranged a lawyer to handle Lucia's lawsuit pro bono. And Dorothy's Circle, now calling themselves the Friends of Miller Cabin, set up a rotation to deliver groceries and keep watch at night. When the children started school that fall, they walked in with mixed emotions. Nelson carried his notebook everywhere, planning to turn his notes into a history project titled The Cabin That Saved Families. Kara kept her guard up, sitting alone at lunch the first few days. Some kids teased them about living in the woods. But others approached quietly, saying their grandparents or cousins had once stayed in that same cabin. One girl handed Kara a note that read, "My mom says your family is brave." Lucia watched her children adjust, pride and fear twisting inside her. The lawsuit moved forward slowly, but every day felt like a small victory. When the evening air grew cool, she'd sit on the porch steps with a cup of tea, listening to crickets hum and her children laugh inside. The scars of hatred hadn't vanished, but the community's response had grown louder, stronger, unshakable. The cabin stood firm beneath the moonlight, once a symbol of secrecy, now a beacon of endurance. And for the first time since they'd arrived, Lucia believed they might just be part of something bigger than survival. Rebecca filed the lawsuit on a brisk Monday morning, her tone calm but her eyes bright with fire. Lucia sat beside her at the long mahogany conference table, hands clasped tightly in her lap, listening as Rebecca outlined the case: wrongful termination, gender discrimination, retaliation. The company's name, Halberd Pharmaceuticals, carried weight in the region. They employed hundreds and donated generously to local causes. But Lucia knew the truth behind the glossy reputation. The response came swiftly and viciously. Within a week, Halberd's legal team filed a counterclaim, asserting that Lucia had been terminated for consistent performance deficiencies and repeated tardiness. Attached were pages of falsified performance reviews and internal memos suggesting she had neglected client responsibilities. Lucia stared at the documents in disbelief. "Those aren't my reports," she whispered. "I never saw these before." Rebecca leaned forward, expression sharp. "That's what we expected. Fabrication leaves fingerprints. We'll find them." Over the following weeks, Rebecca worked tirelessly, dissecting every inconsistency. She subpoenaed internal emails, time logs, and client correspondence. Each new piece of evidence revealed how carefully the company had tried to rewrite Lucia's record. But truth had a way of surfacing. Two of Lucia's former colleagues reached out quietly through encrypted messages. One, a data analyst named Rachel, confirmed that the HR department had been instructed to adjust Lucia's records post-termination. The other, a sales rep named Marcus, provided the most damning testimony yet. During a department meeting, the vice president of sales had openly said they needed someone without all that single mother baggage. Marcus had written it down in his notes that day, and he still had them. When Rebecca read the line aloud in her office, the room went silent. Lucia felt her chest tighten. "So that's what I was to them," she said quietly. "Baggage." Rebecca looked up from her notes. "Not anymore. Now you're a case they'll remember for years." As the hearing date approached, the company shifted tactics. They offered Lucia a private settlement, 2 years' salary and benefits, in exchange for a signed non-disclosure agreement. The offer came through email with polite legal phrasing, but the meaning was clear: take the money, stay quiet, and disappear. Lucia sat on the porch that night with the letter in her hands, her children asleep inside. The wind rustled through the trees as she imagined what that money could do. It could fix the roof, pay for Nelson's schooling, give them breathing room. But each time she thought about signing, she saw the faces of every woman Josephine had written about in her journal. Those who endured, those who fought back, those who refused silence. The next morning, she called Rebecca. "Tell them no," she said. "We go to court." Rebecca exhaled deeply but smiled. "That's the hard road," she warned. "It's the right one," Lucia replied. Word of Lucia's refusal spread quickly. To some, it made her a symbol of strength. To others, a target of resentment. But Rebecca's respect for her client only deepened. Together, they spent long nights preparing depositions, organizing testimony, and reviewing exhibits. Lucia often worked until midnight at Mrs. Patel's farm and still managed to meet Rebecca at dawn for prep sessions. Mrs. Patel noticed. "You work like you're building something permanent," she told Lucia one afternoon as they packed crates of fresh produce. "I guess I am," Lucia said, brushing soil from her gloves. The older woman smiled. "If the case goes well, I'll have a proposal for you. There's room for a partner here, someone with vision and grit. Think about it." It was the first time anyone had called Lucia a partner, not an employee. The words sank deep. Meanwhile, the children were finding their rhythm. Cara had joined the school debate team after teacher overheard her defending her mother in class. Her speeches were fiery and precise, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had once used only in arguments at home. Nelson's history project on the cabin had won the regional competition, complete with interviews, photos, and excerpts from Josephine's journal. Local news featured him briefly, calling his work a preservation of community memory. Lucas, once withdrawn, had begun painting scenes from their life in the woods, vivid colors, sweeping skies, small figures standing tall beside the old cabin. His art teacher entered one of his paintings into a youth exhibition in Asheville. Olga, oblivious to the adult storms around her, continued to thrive, singing to the chickens at the Patel farm, making friends everywhere she went. At night, Lucia watched them and felt a fragile balance return to her world. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was joined by something sturdier, momentum. Then, one morning, Maria Torres called with news. "Lucia, your story's gone viral. A major social account reposted my article. You're trending." Lucia blinked. "Trending?" "Thousands of comments," Maria said excitedly. "People are sharing stories about workplace bias, single mothers, everything. It's become a movement. Companies are reaching out. I've had 3 executives message me asking how to contact you for job offers." Lucia smiled faintly. "That's kind, but I'm staying here. We've still got work to do." As the trial date drew closer, the farmhouse became both sanctuary and strategy room. Rebecca often visited after hours, spreading legal documents across the kitchen table while Lucia brewed tea and Nelson helped organize boxes of evidence. They worked late into the night, the hum of crickets outside blending with the rustle of paper. Rebecca looked up one evening and said softly, "You know, most people would have taken that settlement. I've handled dozens of these cases. But you're different, Lucia. You're forcing a system that counts on silence to listen." Lucia thought of Josephine's letter, the one that said survival wasn't enough. "I guess it's time they heard us," she replied. By the time the courthouse date was set, 2 months out, the tension had settled into resolve. The company's lawyers filed motions to delay. Rebecca counted each one with precision. The press began circling, and Maria's follow-up story framed Lucia not as a victim but as a catalyst for change. On the final Friday before the hearing, Lucia finished her shift at the farm and stood overlooking the fields. The sunset painted everything in amber and gold. Mrs. Patel joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, you've already changed something," she said. Lucia nodded slowly. "Maybe so. But we're not done yet." Behind her, the cabin lights flickered on, and the sound of her children's laughter floated through the air. The fight ahead was daunting, but the family she was fighting for, and the legacy she'd inherited, gave her all the strength she needed. The courthouse in Laurel County was packed on the first morning of Lucia's trial. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras poised. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation as Lucia sat beside Rebecca at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly together. She wore the same navy blazer she'd once worn to pharmaceutical conferences, pressed, simple, professional. It wasn't armor, but it felt close enough. Rebecca began with calm precision, outlining 14 years of documented excellence, quarterly awards, glowing performance reviews, client commendations. Slide after slide displayed Lucia's record, numbers that spoke louder than words. Then came the sudden drop, the termination letter, dated just weeks after she'd been named regional lead. The jury watched the timeline unfold in silence. When the defense took its turn, the company's lawyer, a sharp man in a gray suit, tried to frame Lucia as unstable, claiming she had attendance issues and failed to adapt to new performance standards. But each claim was met with evidence to the contrary. Rebecca had done her work thoroughly. She presented internal HR memos showing Lucia had exceeded all targets until the quarter before her firing. She played recorded testimony from clients who described Lucia as reliable, professional, and the best representative they'd ever worked with. The defense tried again, shifting their approach to character. They hinted that Lucia's struggles as a single mother had made her distracted and unfit for leadership roles. The room grew tense, But Rebecca was ready. She called Rachel and Marcus, the two former co-workers who had risked their jobs, to testify. Rachel confirmed that company leadership had retroactively changed Lucia's personnel file. Marcus provided his meeting notes, reading aloud the line that froze the courtroom: "We need someone without all that single mother baggage." The words hung in the air. Lucia felt them sting again, but this time they didn't cut her down, they strengthened her resolve. On the second day, the defense tried to recover by calling Amanda Stevens, Lucia's replacement. Amanda looked nervous as she took the stand, fidgeting with her bracelet. Under direct questioning, she praised the company's progressive values. But when Rebecca stood and began her cross-examination, the tone shifted. "Ms. Stevens," Rebecca began gently, "do you recall what you were told about this position during your interview?" Amanda hesitated. Just that the previous employee wasn't a good fit. Rebecca handed her a printed transcript of the interview notes. "Is this your handwriting?" Amanda nodded slowly. "Please read the highlighted portion." Amanda's voice wavered as she read. "They said they needed someone who could focus fully on work without family distractions." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca stepped closer. "Ms. Stevens, were you aware that you were hired at a higher salary than Ms. Rivera, despite having less experience?" Amanda's cheeks flushed. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I didn't ask for that. It was just the offer they made." Rebecca nodded, her voice steady but firm. "Thank you, Ms. Stevens. No further questions." By the time Amanda stepped down, the defense had lost its footing completely. On the third morning, it was Lucia's turn. She walked to the witness stand, her heart pounding. Rebecca gave her an encouraging nod before the clerk swore her in. "Ms. Rivera," Rebecca began, "why did you decide to bring this case forward?" Lucia took a deep breath. "Because I've seen how easily the system erases women like me," she said, her voice clear. "I worked hard for 14 years, every sales goal, every client, every review. I raised my children, sometimes sleeping 3 hours a night, and still showed up on time. When I was fired, I thought it was the end. I couldn't afford rent. We lived in our car for weeks. I applied for jobs, and the moment they saw I had kids, the door closed." Her tone deepened, steady with conviction. "But something changed when I found that cabin. I realized this wasn't just about me. Every mother who's been passed over, every worker told they're too much, every person who had to choose between family and survival, I'm here for them." Her words carried across the room, unbroken. Rebecca didn't interrupt. The jurors listened, transfixed. Lucia described the night she'd parked under highway lights so her children could do homework, the kindness of strangers who helped her get back on her feet, and how she had decided that silence would never protect her again. By the time she finished, there were tears in the jury box, and even one on the judge's cheek. The defense declined to cross-examine. When the jury retired to deliberate, Lucia waited with her children and Rebecca in a small conference room. The hours stretched until they felt endless. Kara sat holding Olga's hand. Nelson scrolled through messages of support from people online, while Lucas sketched quietly in the corner. After 3 hours, the bailiff entered. "The jury has reached a verdict." The courtroom filled once again. Lucia stood as the foreperson read the verdict aloud. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Lucia Rivera." The words that followed blurred together: damages awarded for lost wages, emotional distress, punitive fines against the company. But all Lucia heard was the sound of her children's quiet sobs of relief. Rebecca placed a hand over Lucia's. "You did it," she whispered. The judge's written opinion went further than anyone expected. It formally recognized discrimination based on family status intersecting with race and gender as unlawful under state precedent, a legal milestone. Outside the courthouse, The steps were overflowing with supporters, community members, cabin families, reporters, even Mrs. Patel holding a bouquet of fresh wildflowers. Lucia faced the crowd and the cameras but spoke directly to the people who had stood by her. "This isn't just my victory," she said. "It's proof that when we document, when we stand together, we win." Josephine Miller believed in that. "I'm continuing her work." Applause rose, echoing across the square. Months passed, and life began to take a new shape. Lucia used part of her settlement to establish the Josephine Miller Fund, providing legal aid and emergency support for families like hers. She invested the rest into Mrs. Patel's farm, officially becoming a business partner. The farm thrived under their joint management, expanding its reach while hiring people often overlooked elsewhere. 6 months later, the cabin stood brighter than ever. Volunteers had helped restore its roof and repaint its weathered walls, but its spirit remained unchanged, a place of renewal. Lucia and her children had moved into a small house nearby, but they visited the cabin daily. Cara now ran a youth mentorship group for teens passing through, helping them apply for scholarships and internships. Nelson had turned his history project into a digital archive documenting 50 years of the cabin's impact. Lucas maintained a small garden behind the cabin, where herbs, tomatoes, and sunflowers grew in careful rows. Olga, now 6, made colorful welcome cards for every new family. One crisp autumn evening, a car pulled up the dirt road. A weary man stepped out, a single father named Miguel, with 3 children and eyes full of exhaustion. Lucia greeted him with warmth. She offered groceries, supplies, and a copy of Josephine's journal. "You'll find everything you need in here," she said gently. That night, after helping them settle, Lucia sat at the old wooden table and opened the journal to a blank page. Her handwriting was firm and deliberate. "I arrived broken, jobless, and rejected by a system designed to keep people like me down. I leave stronger, employed, and victorious, not just in court but in life. This cabin taught me that kindness creates ripples across generations, that our struggles can become foundations for others' strength, and that fighting back is not just possible but necessary. To whoever reads this next, document everything, fight back, lean on this community, and never let them make you believe you deserve less. You are not alone." As the ink dried, Lucia closed the book, feeling Josephine's spirit close by. Outside, the night was calm. Lucia stepped onto the porch where Josephine once stood. Her children joined her, watching Miguel's family unpack. The lantern light glowed warmly against the cabin walls. Lucia placed her hand on the weathered wood and whispered, "Thank you, Josephine. We're keeping your promise alive." Inside, Miguel sat at the same table, reading the journal by lamplight while his children slept. The story continued, one generation passing strength to the next, the cabin standing firm as ever, a quiet testament to courage, kindness, and the power of never giving up. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Share it with us in the comments below. If Lucia's story moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Tomorrow, we're bringing you another powerful story that will remind you how hope can rise from the hardest places. Your likes, comments, and shares help us reach more people and keep stories like this alive. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of this community that believes in strength, love, and second chances.